Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. I'm your host, Gary Scheiner. As we wrap up another inspiring year, we're excited to present a special episode that features highlights from the three most viewed episodes. First, we visit food, technology, and insulin, where Integrated Diabetes Services clinicians Jenny Smith, Dana Roseman, and Tavia Vitale reveal their secrets to mastering glucose management. Whether you're using a sophisticated insulin delivery system or simply taking shots, it's amazing how the basics and little things apply to all of us. Next, we delve into the thought-provoking discussion that I had with Riva Greenberg on the concept of glucose control being just an illusion. Listen to some of the key takeaways from this interesting conversation. Finally, check out a clip from the #1 episode of 2025, Libre 3 Plus versus Dexcom G7. In this segment, I sat down with Dana Roseman, IDS's Director of Technology and Applied Research, to settle the argument on who makes the better CGM system.
I'm Jennifer Smith, the registered dietitian, certified diabetes care and education specialist with Integrated Diabetes Services. Excited to chat with my colleagues, Dana and Tavia, today, all about something we find very, very important as we move forward with all the technology that we've got in use today. Have always taught a lot about insulin use, right? Insulin use and understanding the timing of our insulins today and everything. But there's kind of a little deeper dive to take with that because of our AID systems or automated insulin delivery systems and kind of all of the ones on the market, using them a little bit differently in respect to understanding the insulin timing and knowing what to do with how your system works. Yes?
And being successful with it. And one thing, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Dana Roseman, Director of Technology and Applied Research at Integrated Diabetes. And I would say that try to remind people all the time, and I'm sure you do the same, that we have all these fancy algorithms and fancy pumps and these amazing continuous glucose monitors, 24/7 alerts and alarms. But the insulin that we're using is still the same insulin we used, 25 years ago? And it's no faster now than it was back then.
100%. In fact, that's kind of funny. You're saying 25 years, and I'm thinking, has it been really that long that we've had?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I switched to ultra rapid earlier than that. I know maybe not everybody uses the ultra rapids, but I mean, it's not like it's magically faster.
No, you're actually right, because I think it was about 2000 when I went to my doctor and said, there's this new, more rapid acting insulin, Humalog, right, on the market. And I had been still using our insulin up to that point and was frustrated. And he's like, sure, I can write you a prescription for that. But it's 25 years since those more rapid than our insulin came out. And now understanding them, even with, the Fiasp and the Lumjev, the more ultra rapid actings. And then how do they work when we're using automated systems?
And then how do they work when you need different kinds of foods? That's the other challenge. It's not just let's learn this one rule and apply it. And I'll introduce myself quick. I'm Tavia Vitale. I'm registered nurse, certified diabetes care and education specialist with Integrated also. And I'm the director of intensive management services.
Meal composition matters so much, and we can't expect the insulin to work differently just because we're eating differently. I do try to remind people the same slow insulin that we're wanting to bring down a high blood sugar of 250, but we're so frustrated it's taking that long to bring that high blood sugar down. Same insulin we're using for food. It's not going to work any faster.
No, it certainly is not. And that's, again, understanding system to system, because there are nuances to each of the systems and how it accumulates insulin on board or IOB and how we watch and then interact with that. And then the bolus timing around meals or the adjustment for exercise with these different types of systems.
If somebody wasn't even on a smart system, if they were on MDI, what do they need to know about how their insulin works to consider adequate, appropriate, pre-meal bolus or injection timing? I don't want to get it right, but to have the most optimal glucose excursion after a meal, you have to understand how your insulin works. We sort of breezed over it that, we're going to be focused in on like Humalog, Lispro, Novolog, and all the different renditions of the different names of the same kinds of insulin, right?
Right.
And then we'll also consider what's the slight differences with Fiasp or Lumjev that are also now available.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if your glucose is, let's say it's at target and it's steady, if you're on MDI or taking injections, you have your baseline basal injection that you do every day, and that is there holding you steady.
Mhm.
And then you take your dose for that meal of your rapid acting insulin. And the goal is that dose prevents you from getting a spike after your meal and lands you back down in 4 or 5 hours back at your target without a low.
I might put the caveat, an extreme spike, because
Correct.
I don't want to give anybody the expectation that even people who don't have diabetes never get a spike.
Right.
We should define spike.
And
Yes,
what
we
should
should.
the excursion be, right?
Right,
I get the question very frequently, well, my blood sugar is going up high. And then we look at the graphs and see, well, but it is without corrective action coming back down. Great.
Right.
Then what should the rise after a meal be? And the expected with the standard intake of carbs, proteins, and fats at a mealtime should be somewhere between, on the low end, maybe a 30-point rise. And on the high end, it could be 70 or 80 points. So if you're starting, as you said, Tavia, with like a 100 blood sugar and you eat a standard meal, the excursion could be 180.
Absolutely.
But then
for 2 hours, if it's a standard rate of digestion kind of meal, it really can go up. And this is the challenge point, right? Because anybody who's working really hard on their diabetes doesn't want it to go above a certain threshold. Everybody sort of has their own threshold, right? So we're going to focus in on the standards of care guidelines that say you're trying not to go above 180 after meals. If you're trying not to go above a lower number, it's the same concept, but just in your own mind, replace the 180 with 160 or 140 or whatever it is.
Right.
But it's not flat. That's the most important thing.
Correct.
It's not flat. In fact, my diabetes educator for me, when I was probably in my early 20s, I think mid-20s, maybe early 20s, she made me a Post-it note and she drew a hill and she did before meal, after meal, 4 or 5 hours later, and wrote, it must go up before it comes down.
Love that.
Because I didn't want high blood sugars at that stage
that.
in my life. I was so fearful of having high blood sugars that I was like way stacking my insulin because I didn't want to rise. I didn't want to spike, but I didn't have a concept of realistic expectations of that 4 to 5 hour action time of the original dose of insulin. And we're talking about known meals, right? So it isn't realistic to expect that every meal under the sun that someone can throw at you or that you could choose to eat in the moment, that you're always going to know the perfect pre-bolus time to stay within your target glucose after. It just isn't realistic to think that if you're not making any insulin.
I can say though that your typical meals, and when I have a chance to work with somebody, I usually encourage them to figure out your most well done meals, right? The 20 to 25 things.
The same. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You're going to use them over and over, figure them out, because that's 80% of your management is what you do over and over. But you also can take what you learned in those circumstances and apply them when you're eating out or eating at a friend's house, because those meals are still your preferences. So if you're going out for dinner and it's a meal, you're likely to pick similar things that you know that your taste buds like, and it could be close enough as an estimate to use as a reference, is my point.
And I love that you said that, because so often I talk to someone and says, well, how do you bolus or pre-bolus when you're eating out? Because you have no idea what you're going to eat. And I'm like, well, you kind of do. Because if you hate, curry, you're not going to get a curry. You're just not. And if you are a vegetarian, you're not getting a hamburger. So you kind of know what you're going to eat. So I do always push back a little bit.
Yeah. It's a great place to start is your known foods, again, tested and true basal rates and ratios and all those kinds of things. And then start making some notes about what you're kind of seeing. And then as we move into using automation and using the technology we have at our fingertips today, I think one of the best pieces of technology that's been around for a long time is absolutely a CGM.
No, absolutely.
Your CGM trend, it can teach you so much. And if you know how to interact with it, then you're going to be able to see what your system is doing and make proper adjustments.
Right.
Welcome to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. I'm Gary Scheiner, and I'm your host for today. We're going to be discussing the illusion of glucose control today, and I am delighted to be joined by Riva Greenberg. Riva is a multi-time author, columnist, and a blogger. So if there's anything you want to know about diabetes, chances are she has written about it. And, the topic, about the illusion of glucose control is kind of an interesting one. There's certain terminology we try not to use in the diabetes world nowadays. Like, we tend not to use the word diabetic, try to avoid that if we can. We also don't use the term compliant. That's one we try to stay away from. But the idea of control is another thing we're going to talk about today, and whether that should be a taboo word or what we should use instead. But Riva, tell us a little more about yourself. Other than being a prolific writer, tell us about the real Riva.
Oh, God. Oh, no, that would take the entire hour. So let's just say I've had type 1 for 53 years. I got it in 1972. And I typically say, if I'm talking in front of a group, now you know how old I am, if you're quick. I got involved in this work about 25 years ago. I was at a bridge point in my advertising writing career, and I wanted to do something to actually help people. And I went to a diabetes educator for the first time after having had diabetes for 32 years because I was getting married that year. And I don't know, this idea bubbled up. Maybe I could help people with diabetes. And since I was a writer by trade, I started out writing articles, writing for various diabetes publications, 7 years with the Huffington Post. Of course, you can go back and look for those articles online. They're all classic. And I started going to conferences to meet people, and then started getting invited to them to speak as a speaker. Wrote 3 books along the way, as you said, a blog. And the most recent things I've written is, as you said, about the absolute fact that we cannot control blood sugar.
Why do you feel that diabetes cannot be controlled?
Well, we should say diabetes cannot be controlled and blood sugar cannot be controlled. And there's a couple of very fundamental reasons. One is neuroscience, biology, how our body works. We're biological. We can't control our blood pressure. We can't control our heartbeat. And yet we have this idea that we can control our blood sugar. But as a biological organism, our blood sugar is a symphony along with all our metabolic processes. And everything affects everything else. Let me just tell you the second reason why you really can't control it at all. And that's the pure unpredictability of life. I may decide how I want today to play out, but I really don't know how it's going to play out. Or when I go to a restaurant and I'm a good girl and I pre-bolus, and then I get told that the meal's going to be delayed because they ran out of what I ordered. The pure unpredictability and complexity of life impacts us every day. And so those 2 factors are huge. And the idea of control, I believe, really came out of the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution, when medicine absorbed values from both of these revolutions. Like machine thinking is about accuracy and precision and cause and effect. But the human body doesn't work that way. The scientific revolution was about measurement and evaluation. And so we're constantly measuring and evaluating. And that's great, because I'm not against any of the tools we have. Thank God we have them. It's made my life a whole lot easier. I was doing a workshop at Camp Najeta in New Jersey for adults with type 1. And I was presenting this idea that we can't control our blood sugar. And I had a woman start to sob with relief because nobody had ever told her that before. And she held herself so accountable for something that was impossible to achieve. I think we're much better off to tell people the truth. That, yes, you can learn your patterns, how you do with food and exercise. You can, God willing, I imagine most of the people listening to this have CGMs. You can see how they affect your blood sugar, and you can start experimenting, doing small experiments to see how food and exercise affect things. Notice how stress affects you or bad night's sleep, menstruation. And, then if you have the relaxation, that sounds like a funny word, but if you have the calm along with the confidence that I don't have to get the perfect number, there's no such thing. And in fact, it used to drive me crazy that every meter commercial always showed 106. Just to drive me insane.
If they had a meter that said, 283,
Right.
I would buy that meter. That's a real meter. I want to try to just summarize some of your pearls of wisdom, and there have been many of them. One is that we don't control glucose levels. However, we can influence them. Life is driving our glucose levels in different directions every second, every minute, every hour of every day. We have the ability to influence, but not really control them. Also, that words do matter. We shouldn't use terminologies that make us feel guilty, make us feel like a failure. And keep it real, keep it honest. And you also said that we are responsible for our effort. We are not responsible for the outcomes, because the outcomes are largely beyond our control or our influence. We can learn from experience. We learn from patterns. We have to flow with what's going on. Our lives are changing all the time. What worked previously may not work now. The one constant in our lives, all of our lives, is change. Tradition and predictability, consistency can be an asset when it comes to diabetes management, but it's not for everybody. A person's quality of life matters more than anything. You think I caught most of the key points, or anything that I missed?
Yeah, but it's interesting listening to you say all this, which presumably I said. I realize sometimes some of wisdom just comes with age and experience, right?
So we encourage everyone to age as quickly as possible.
Age very quickly, because, I don't know, it's funny. I mean, for me personally, I'm looking now at what's it like to be an older person with type 1 diabetes. There's been scant attention paid to that.
Yeah. Well, as Mick Jagger said, what a drag it is getting old. It's got its benefits. You can get into movies cheaper, all kinds of discounts we get. But yeah, it comes with its share of challenges.
Yeah. And for your listeners, Gary, when you talked about a lot of people are perfectionists, and I was the same. Maybe it's worth asking yourself, what does perfection get you? Perfection itself is a vehicle of control, right? I want to be perfect so I can control everything. And it's a very one-sided thing. Am I the perfect, or I'm nothing?
Yeah. And it's not necessarily an influencer.
No, nor flow.
Could be an influencer in a negative way.
Yeah, could be.
Word from our sponsor. Byram Healthcare understands that managing diabetes isn't one size fits all. With a full range of CGMs, insulin pumps, and diabetes supplies from top brands, Byram makes it easy to get what you need, hassle-free, shipped right to your door. And Byram's team of experts helps navigate insurance so you can focus on living your best life. Ready for better diabetes care? Visit byramhealthcare.com/podcast or call 866-692-8024 and select option 3. And now, back to our program.
I'm your host, Gary Scheiner. I am pleased to be joined today by the Director of Technology and Applied Research at Integrated Diabetes Services, Dana Roseman. Say hi
there.
Dana. Tell us a little about Dana.
Well, I have been with Integrated Diabetes, I think almost 5 years. I have had type 1 diabetes myself for almost 30. And as I was thinking about talking with you about this podcast, I was reflecting on, I think my first continuous glucose monitor was in almost 20 years ago, that first Dexcom 7. And I don't know if you remember it. We probably have it in a diabetes museum somewhere. It had this oval shaped receiver that I remember I used to have to carry with me when I was training for marathons. And it was so heavy. And
The problem with carrying it is that it never connected. It had question marks in the side. And unfortunately, every 5 minutes when I started running, the speed of my circulatory system caused problems with the connection with the CGM, and I would just get question marks. So it was pretty worthless, and I would need to stop and do finger sticks anyway. Yeah, that's exactly it. But it was really amazing when it came out. It was exciting. And that was the first thing I think that I thought, wow, technology is really going to come far and wide for type 1. And it's continued to evolve, obviously.
And there's a lot of different options in the CGM space now. The sensor's getting smaller and cuter. We've got the Dexcom G7 and the Libre 3 Plus kind of at the leading edge of CGM technology as far as what we have available now. So which systems have you used?
I think I have used every single system that has been on the market, except I have not had the implantable ever since. But, all the way from the early ones we were talking about earlier, the Medtronic Guardian, on up to, I guess, the G7, the Dexcom G7, and then the Libre 3. I did recently wear both of those together as just my own, experiment, sample size N=1. And I wore them on the same place on my body. I started them on the same day. So they had that initial warm up together. So, I definitely like to compare the products.
Well, we're at N=2 because I did the same thing. 4 weeks, I went with Dexcom G7 and Libre 3 Plus and had them right side by side on my arm as they were. I don't normally wear my sensor on my arm, but I did it just.
So I wore mine on my leg. So maybe this is N=1 in 2 separate studies.
Could be. I just wanted to follow all of their little recommendations as to where to wear it. So they couldn't come back and say, and you didn't wear it on your arm, so that's not valid. I did just what they told me to do. I was a good boy.
Okay.
So, I feel like we've got fair comparison since we both wore them on the same body part and got the side-by-side experience. So what was your experience like using Libre 3 Plus?
Well, I think I have to give the caveat that not all technology is perfect, right? I mean, we are expecting a lot from a small disposable sensor, and we're not wanting it to have sensor errors. We're not wanting it to have, problems with accuracy, but it's testing interstitial fluid. Our finger sticks is testing blood glucose. And so that I just have to say that we're always going to have sensor errors. Right. I think we'd all like to say that. Dana. Well, the reason is because the Libre 3 just gave me so many false lows that I stopped trusting it. That was my kind of lasting opinion. Is my Dexcom perfect? Absolutely not. But I did end up in the end trusting it a little bit more. And I did not change. I wear an open source loop system, and I did not change the data going into my pump delivery to the Libre because I didn't trust it.
I had the same experience, false lows.
Yeah.
And not just false lows, but false, urgent, severe, you're about to die kind of lows that were
right. And you couldn't change the alarm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So with Dexcom, you can make some of those personalized alarms and even target just nighttime to have a different subset of alarms. And I couldn't change
on the iPhone, you can't set it to vibrate. Those urgent lows are going to beep, and they beep loud. My wife was ready to kill me because in the middle of the night, so many nights it was giving me those lows, and I wasn't laying on it. So I don't think they were compression.
Same. I wasn't either. And what was frustrating is that, it was waking me up, but I knew it was wrong. And so it was just unnecessary.
Were there any things about the Libre 3 Plus that you found advantageous that you didn't have?
I do think the insertion process was lovely. It doesn't make as loud of a snapping noise with the insertion compared to the Dexcom. That noise can sometimes startle people. And I thought that the insertion was very painless. And I really did forget that I was wearing a second device. I don't feel my Dexcom typically, but I didn't feel anything additional.
Yeah, I didn't feel any difference in the insertion process. I did find just to unscrew the cap before inserting, it took a little more strength to unscrew the Libre 3 Plus cap. And I've actually had some patients tell me they've had difficulty unscrewing that.
Oh,
I
that's
don't know if
interesting.
they
I haven't had that.
measure torque on these things.
I mean, but that is a big issue because a lot of people lose grip strength, especially as they get older. So yeah, I didn't notice that. Maybe I'm just stronger, Gary.
I think so. Yeah. Texas women have hidden strength. Yeah. The accuracy comparisons, they're pretty close. Now, the studies that the companies conduct before launching, because they have to submit to the FDA, the accuracies, they're reasonably close. They're around 8% MARD, meaning, on average,
I know that's what's
they're 8% off from the
published,
lab
but
value.
this is, I've worn a Libre 3 several times over their launch and compared it to a Dexcom. And every time I do the comparison, I just have staggering false lows. And I understand that the published data says otherwise. So I'm not really sure if that is, study protocol versus real world experience.
Yeah, there was a recent real world study published in the Journal of Diabetes Science and Technology, and it did show the Dexcom being more reliable in the hypoglycemic range, but it showed the Libre being a little more reliable in the high glucose range. So
that I do agree with. And I think I could, if I never had a low or a false low, maybe that would shift my opinion.
Yeah. So, accuracy wise, the false lows, I agree with you completely. I experienced almost a dozen of those in the 4 weeks that I was wearing it because I documented them. I did a finger stick each time they happened to confirm it was a false alert. They did happen quite a bit. I might have had one with my Dexcom in that time, if that many. The false low alerts are an issue. They're disruptive, and they cause us to lose faith in the alert. And I can see
that
people
was what happened. Is I just stopped paying attention to it, and then that's not beneficial at all.
No, because someone could be having an actual low and thinking, no, it's just my sensor. It does that on its own. It's like the boy who cried wolf. You just start ignoring it after a while. Yeah. So that is a potential problem.
Well, and the other issue, remember, Gary, you can't calibrate it. And so you can't kind of fix the problem if there is a problem with the sensor.
Yeah, at least with Dexcom, if you finger stick and there's a big discrepancy, you can tell it, hey, you're running too high or you're running too low, and it'll adjust itself. Abbott's Libre has never allowed that to happen.
So just to wrap things up, I think when we look at the Libre 3 Plus and the Dexcom G7, from an accuracy standpoint, overall, they perform similarly. We might find that the Libre is a little more reliable at the high end, Dexcom at the lower end, and certainly with younger people, Dexcom seems to perform better. Feature-wise, there are some things about the Libre 3 Plus system that are advantageous. It's probably more features that the Dexcom has as an advantage, but ultimately, the system you choose really depends on your personal preferences, kind of like when we choose a pump or an AID system or algorithm. It's based on what your personal interests and preferences and needs are. And definitely you want to consider which system integrates with the pump or pen or AID system that you're utilizing. Thanks for tuning in to Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast is brought to you by Integrated Diabetes Services, where experience meets expertise, passion meets compassion, and diabetes care is personal because we live it too. Our team of clinicians, all living with type 1 diabetes, understands the challenges firsthand. We're here to help no matter where you are in the world. From glucose management to self-care strategies, the latest tech, sports and exercise, weight loss, type 1 pregnancy, and emotional well-being, we've got you covered. We offer consultations in English and Spanish via phone, video chat, email, and text. Want to learn more? Visit integrateddiabetes.com or email info@integrateddiabetes.com to schedule a consultation. On behalf of Think Like a Pancreas, the podcast, I'm Gary Scheiner, wishing you a fantastic week ahead. And don't forget to think like a pancreas.